Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And today we're going to be talking all about how to capture our travels with pen and paper in a really kind of creative and super fun way. And I just, again, want to reiterate that even if you don't have a big trip coming up, maybe you just want to capture, a summer weekend at the lake or a beach trip that you went on or a vacation from Italy 3 years ago. We're going to really dive into some creative ways to remember all of your trips. So excited to show you the journaling I did while overseas and all the different styles and topics and materials that you can use to start your own. And share my top 3 tips for where to even begin. Because I think if you're like most of us, it can be really intimidating staring at a blank page in a brand new journal and thinking, what am I even going to write about and where should it all go? Like, you visited a city you loved. Where on the page should that be? What am I even writing about? And so that's exactly what we're going to talk about today and where you can get your inspiration from. So, on the left, you can see this was a travel journaling page that I did after Mont Blanc invited myself and Chantel over to Hamburg, Germany in October to visit the Mont Blanc house. And it had just opened, and we had this amazing trip filled with incredible restaurants, an 8-hour walking tour of the city. And so I wrote a lot of sort of fun facts about the trip and kept it really simple in black and white with very simple line drawings, flourishing and using some of the design elements that I saw throughout the Mont Blanc house and also design elements that I saw on the buildings within the city of Hamburg. So again, really kind of simple example of some line drawings. I'll quickly show you when I was in Italy in 2018. This is when I started to really switch from just writing in a journal about my travels to trying to make them look a little bit more visually interesting. Name of each place that we were going. I like to write the date at the top of the page as well. And I started to kind of experiment with even more sort of line drawings here, a little bit of color, and, just trying to capture the essence of a place and some of the fun facts from our tours, landmarks, things like that, in a way that was accessible and easy for me to do while we were traveling. So, again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Another way to travel journal that we are going to be discussing today is something that looks a little bit like this, which is where you're choosing sort of a big quote or a memorable quote that either reminds you of the trip or that maybe you came across while you were traveling, and a little illustration to match. So this was from recently when I was on a trip to the mountains with my family, and there was just a few things throughout the trip that really stood out to me, and one of them was just these really dainty yellow wildflowers along the shore of the Bow River in Canmore, Alberta here. And I just wanted to capture that for myself and to capture a little idyllic scene when my daughter was napping outside in her stroller and I had, 20 minutes just to myself to look out at the scene in front of me and sketch that live. Whereas when I was doing some of these journals in Italy, these were done, after the fact when I was on a train, looking at old photos, looking at my notes app to capture some of those key stats. My current travel journal is kind of an amalgamation, a combination of all the journals that I just showed you from the past. So I'm integrating, of course, calligraphy still, but a lot more color and a lot more painting. So not just typography, I'm integrating paintings now. So this is an example of our trip to Provence. So I'm naming some of the places that we went. Again, some fun facts. A lot of these images are from my camera roll on things that I just want to remember. On the left, we have Avignon and Nîmes. And so I'm showcasing, a lot more color, a lot more line drawings. And we are going to talk about how you even choose what you want to include in your travel journal and why. Obviously, this for me is just purely for creative expression. And so it's not necessarily to have the most perfect composition, but just to lay out your pages in a way that makes you feel super excited and inspired and really nostalgic. Because that's, I think, what, for me, travel journaling is all about, is the ability to look back on these in years from now. The last thing I would want when you look at those journals is to feel overwhelmed. Know that that's normal, obviously, if you've never travel journaled before, but we are going to be breaking it down step by step today, and you'll have so many ideas to create your own version after this, I promise. So again, pay close attention to what inspires you today as we go along. So we're going to start with that 3-step process that I've outlined on the first page of your workbook here that kind of eases us into how to start filling a page. So step one, super easy. We're going to make a list of all of the countries or cities or places or experiences that you've been to below. It doesn't mean that you have to journal about them, but it's just going to help us get in the right mindset. And now for step two, this is how I start every single one of my travel journals. So I really want you to remember this while you're traveling and while you're, reflecting on past trips. And I want you to circle or pick one of the cities that you wrote down on the left and then activate your five senses. Again, I want you to remember this after today's class while you're traveling. If you're on vacation right now, every day that you are out in the world and you are trying to capture the essence of your day or the moment, you really just want to activate your five senses. So I just got home from Barcelona, so I'm going to use that as an example. What did I see that made the biggest impact? And I have immediately three things that come into my mind that are related to the architecture in Barcelona. So immediately I'm getting those visuals in my mind, and that is what I'm going to write down. You can use the back of this paper. If you have your notebook handy, you can start writing that there. What did the city sound like? So I've noticed in my travels, I'm sure you've noticed this too, that every city has a soundtrack. And what could you smell? For me, it was the bakeries or the spices around every corner. Maybe it was your morning walk every morning had a particular scent to it because all the bakeries were putting out the fresh bread, as an example. So activating that smell sense. And then what food did you eat and how did it taste? And then lastly, did you feel the ocean or the heat in a new way? So you could stop there and you would have a beautiful travel journal spread just based on your five senses. You can see right here, hear, see, smell. And so honking, Naples was an incredibly loud city. And that's actually something that I fondly remember is just how busy and bustling it was. And so church bells, as an example, on the terrace of our Airbnb. So you could specifically write those out as well. It's just a really, really easy and great place to start. So I talked a lot about this. This is pretty much in all of my travel journals is fun facts from tours. We talked about recording new foods and restaurants, unique artwork and design. So I just want to take a moment to talk about how to document unique artwork and designs. I try to mimic the street signs in some of the places that I've gone. This is an example here where we were just walking past a random apartment building in Barcelona, and it just had this beautiful kind of potted plant design that I decided to try my hand at in my own travel journal. People you meet. So when I was backpacking, when I was 22, that was my most favorite part of the trip was the people we met. So you could write little anecdotes about that. Of course, architecture, museums, landmarks, general observations. You could have a whole spread just about the weather and what your feelings are that day. I showed you an example of some memorable quotes. Color palettes. So I love using color palettes in my travel journal. So these four colors are what I saw everywhere in southern France and Provence. And so I definitely wanted to include some swatches of the color palettes there. And then I tend to stick with those colors as I'm painting in the rest of my spread. I love the idea of just after the fact, if you're reminiscing about a trip, to just document the top 5 highlights from each place. And then, of course, memorable moments. So I showed you that page on what things that my daughter was saying while we were away. And so I would consider that, under the memorable moments category. So if you've never painted before, as an example, and that's totally fine. Like I said, a travel journal can be as simple as just writing the title of the place you're going and your observations based on the list we just went through. And that is 100% a travel journal, and it will be just as beautiful. But the 3 items on the top of this list here are the only things you need. So a notebook in a travel-friendly size, and you need, of course, your writing instruments. I always recommend having more than one pen size. And then a carrying or protective case, because if you're going to be traveling on the go, you don't always want to bring necessarily your backpack or a big purse. And so I bought like a little carrying case for my travel kit that I've shared about over on my Instagram page, and I'm happy to send you the details on that as well. But those sort of 3 elements are exactly what you need. I think overall, the message here is that your journal can be as detailed or as minimalist as you'd like, and so can your travel kit. So I want to talk about the different styles of travel journaling and where I kind of fit in here, because, of course, I didn't invent the idea of travel journaling. I have my own particular style, and I encourage you to find your own particular style as well. So I want to make sure that you're aware of how many different directions you can go with this. So again, we discussed this. You can have a travel journal that you're just writing, like your regular standard handwriting in. You could do collage where you're adding in your maps and your train tickets. You could do a combination of illustration and painting, which is kind of what I've been doing in my current journals. You could focus on typography. So if you've gotten really into the modern calligraphy, or maybe Spencerian script that Mike is teaching, or some of the more traditional scripts that Chantel has covered, you could focus just on typography in your travel journals. And then lastly, the photograph. So I want to show you an example of a few of these things. But essentially, I like to do a mix and match of all. This is purely a creative outlet, and it's for no one else but me. So I feel like I have full freedom to just kind of go wild with calligraphy and drawings and different scripts and photos. And that's the goal of travel journaling, I think, is to make it as much of a creative expression as possible. And of course, a memory keeper. I'm a very nostalgic person, and I don't know if you can relate to that as well, but I just know that I'll be flipping through these pages in decades to come. So at this point, I just want you to think, what your goal is when it comes to your travel journal. And that's going to really help with the style that you gravitate towards. So what I recently invested in that has been an absolute game changer is a portable photo printer. And this is amazing. I'm happy to connect with you over email after the class if you want a link to something like this. But all it is a zinc printer. So it actually doesn't use ink. It'll never run out of ink, which is perfect for traveling. It's the size of my hand, and it prints out photos like this on sticky back paper, and you can just easily paste them into your travel journals. So let's get into our sample spreads. Okay, so by now you kind of have an idea of the places you want to journal about, ideas for what to write about, what materials you need based on the different styles that you're inspired by. And now we're staring at a blank page. Is anyone feeling nervous? We know exactly what we want to write about. We know exactly, the place that we're inspired to write about, but there's something about a blank page that's super intimidating. So instead of getting mad at yourself for feeling intimidated, I just want to take a moment and for all of us to take a deep breath. And I've created some, pseudo blank pages here so that you don't actually have to move over to your real journal just yet. And I want us to create some sample spreads here. First example on the left, this is a really easy one. So if you have a journal that looks similar to this, where you have two vertical pages on either side, we're talking about this is one side, this is another side, okay? So in this example on the right-hand side, I would recommend writing in sort of a larger font the city name. These lines just indicate your actual basic handwriting. And so maybe you're just writing some observations about that city, or you're choosing something off of that list. And then on the left, all you'd be doing is including a simple photo, or you'd be filling the page with a full illustration. So again, this is super simple. We're just sketching out general placement. So I'm going to start with where I want my illustration or my photograph or collage elements to go. So in the bottom left and in the top right, taking up about half the page, I would say. And based on the style that you're interested in, just make a note. So here I'm just going to put illustration, which means that I'm going to want to draw something here. And then maybe I would include a photo in the top right corner. So this just creates some visual balance. Then you would have your title. Again, I'm writing in calligraphy just super quickly here so that you have a general sense. And then I would actually recommend just writing, this would be your regular handwriting. And you can include some subheaders potentially. So that's spread number 2. Another idea would be a photo over here and maybe a bigger illustration over here. So small photo, like a vertical photo, and then a bigger illustration. Again, these are just sketches. And then we'll go title, making note here. And then you could put the title down here this time. and a couple paragraphs up here. Another good layout. The next one here is actually my absolute favorite. So number 4, if you want to make note, this is one of my favorites to do here. And we'll start with the title on the left-hand side. So hopefully you're filling these in your book as we go, or you can just take a screenshot of this page after I'm finished. I'm going to create a little paragraph at the top, and then I'm going to do a illustration. So I'll just put ILL and a photo, horizontal photo underneath. Or the opposite, you could, put the photo on top and the illustration at the bottom, and just a little description under that photo. With, on the right-hand side, a bigger illustration and another title with description. So I know for me, this would have been super helpful if I just had a starting point. Again, these are just ideas, and the last one's super simple because I love doing something like this where maybe you're writing, and I'll just do an example here. Maybe you're writing the name of the city right across the middle of the page. So it's nice and big, and then you're just filling in around that with illustrations, trying to, again, keep in mind composition, visual, balancing the weight of certain things, and then maybe the bottom half of the page here is just writing, and then you're doing a bigger illustration here. So it's always starting with that title and then sort of filling in the white space around that. And I have some good ideas for how to fill in white space on the next page of our workbook here. So to kind of put our tips into action here, the number 1 tip is that you want to create visual balance. So we'll make a note of that here. Create visual balance, which just means that you don't want one page to, be super heavy and you don't have enough white space as an example. So you're just trying to create some balance with the different elements if you're using collage or typography, things like that. The next is to choose 3 to 5 colors max. So this, again, is just going to help your brain not get too visually stimulated. I tend to actually stick with maybe 2 to 3 colors max, but as you can see, I'm also a fan of just the black and white as well, or doing like a monochromatic color scheme where you're doing different shades of the same color would be really cool. And then the last tip, which we haven't really talked about yet, so it's worth kind of taking a moment and letting this sink in, is that you want to create a little bit of a system for the style, height, and line widths for your titles compared to your regular handwriting. So you can see here, my regular handwriting, I've chosen to write all in capital letters. So that's a system. I definitely would recommend, again, always starting with the title. So if you haven't already taken my modern calligraphy series, I would encourage you to go back and watch that. We're restarting it again in September though. So in October. So if you want to wait a little bit, we're going to be restarting the modern calligraphy series in October, where I'm going to teach you exactly how to do this. But for now, feel free to trace along on these, trace some of these basic line drawings. You might notice these little designs, little line work designs down here. You will notice these in all of my travel journals. And that's really just a way that I fill white space. And I choose those marks based on kind of where I need to fill space. So I included some lines down here, some lines here. I started to outline half of my color swatches, lots of lines here. The squiggles you can see from this particular bench at Park Guel. And yeah, they kind of appear in a lot of my travel journals. I included some just to give a little bit of a frame to the photos as well. So just wanted to show you some really simple line drawings and way to integrate that into your travel journals. Let's have the chat, the big chat on kind of logistics and what to look for. So if you haven't printed this out yet, we can leave this on the screen just so that you can follow along with what I'm talking about. But when I was in Europe for a month, I challenged myself to journal in public while I was traveling. My usual process would actually be to not do that. So my usual process is to use photos on my phone and my notes app. But I wanted to experience that feeling of what it was like to plein air paint on location live and sort of make my marks there, just to see what that experience was like and if it differed from reflective journaling, which is where you're doing it after the fact. So I learned a lot. I thought I would share some pros and cons. We could have a conversation and hear your thoughts, because these pros and cons are exactly what happened to me. So let's start with live journaling. So again, this is where you are actually setting up a space with your art supplies at a destination like a landmark, and you are trying to capture the moment right then and there. What I noticed from the cons perspective was that obviously weather conditions come into play. When I was in Spain, it was so hot that I truly only pulled out my travel journal for maybe 10 minutes. And I felt a little bit disappointed at the end of the day, because I thought to myself, this was a challenge I had put forth for myself. I really wanted to do this in the moment, but it was just too hot to do that. So just be cognizant weather conditions come into play. Also, having to bring your supplies and find a safe space to lay them out. So for me, traveling with my Mont Blanc writing instruments, those are very precious to me. And so I didn't necessarily feel comfortable just necessarily laying out all of my supplies on a public park bench, for as an example. So I really had to strategically find spots that I felt like were safe and that were shady, and more work went into that than I thought it would, to be honest. And again, if you're traveling with a group, so that was a question that was just asked in the Q&A that I thought was great, is, how did you manage to do this when you were traveling with family? And really, it was about setting clear boundaries and communicating that I'm going to need time when we stop at a specific landmark, which definitely impacted the itinerary and could potentially limit time in other places. More coordination in the upfront when you're traveling with a group, to let them know that this is something you're going to be doing, and to pick the place that you want to go in advance. So places that were my favorites to travel journal live were cafes. So if you saw my video from Scotland when we were in Edinburgh, we found this secluded, for some reason, beautiful cafe terrace in the middle of a beautiful old building outside. And so I journaled there for probably the longest, like almost an hour. Beautiful parks. Again, I journaled a ton in a park in Scotland, and I pretty much did the whole right side of this spread live at a park in Scotland because I just felt super comfortable there. The weather, it had just finished raining, so I used my jacket to kind of wipe the raindrops off the bench, and then got to work. So I did about half of the page there. And then under big trees, that was my absolute favorite. If you saw my video on Instagram, I was under an olive tree in the beautiful village of Gourd in France, and that was another one of my favorite days, and I think I'll actually remember that for the rest of my life. Reflective journaling. So with our smartphones, you always have a camera in your back pocket. So when you're traveling and you know that you want to travel journal after the fact, just make sure you're taking pictures of everything that inspires you, whether it's landmarks, colors, fashion, food. Definitely take a look at that list on our first page and write down facts from tours in the notes app on your phone. And that way you don't have to, rack your brain. And then print out photos to include with your writing and combine everything at the end of your day or at the end of your trip. So the pros here is that you have more time to sort through what you want to journal about, more privacy. So I would love waking up early before my family at all of our various Airbnbs. And maybe I'd get up an hour before everyone else, and I would just have the outside terrace to myself in the morning, because tourists can be really nosy. I felt like I was, part of the attraction at some destinations, which was a little bit of a strange feeling. And then you have more time for detail, obviously, and then you have that perspective and nostalgia. The cons to that is that you might forget to write down or capture key moments, obviously, and it's so easy to procrastinate when you get home, saying you'll get to it later, and then you become too busy. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me today and getting excited. This is amazing. Thank you so, so much.